the stated objectives of this military operation, and they are as follows here. Guarantee the security for the people of the Donbass region. This is absolutely crucial, Mike, because that is what the Minsk Accords were meant to do. Minsk I and II were meant to guarantee the security of the people in the Donbass region, Donetsk and Lugansk People's Republics, because Minsk failed and was never implemented. And the Ukrainian army kept shelling civilians there for the last 7 years. This is one of the big reasons why. And they were also shelling power stations. The water supply was cut off. So for the people in that region, Russia believed that they had no choice but to intervene to provide security and to restore power, water, and food supplies, because there was also a blockade as well. They didn't always say that. They only started saying that in the last 72 hours.
Right.
Before that, only France and Germany were really giving any mention to the Minsk agreements, because
Right.
they were part of the Normandy format. The UK was not involved directly in that. The US was involved, but everybody voted unanimously at the United Nations Resolution 2022. There was a unanimous UN agreement that the Minsk peace process was going to be the path towards ceasefire, towards peace in that country. And it was actively undermined at every turn by the United States and the government that it installed in Kiev from 2014 to the present.
Right.
So that's a very important point. You will not see that on any mainstream Western media. They basically viewed Ukraine as a de facto unofficial member of NATO because they've been arming them. Special forces have been training them from the US, from the UK, from other NATO member states. So, and also forward staging bases and operations in Ukraine. So obviously Russia viewed that as a threat, not to mention the talk of NATO membership.
Yeah.
And goading Kiev into NATO membership. This is obviously a red line. Russia put those concerns in a document to the US State Department, to the other NATO member states, basically saying we need some security guarantees in terms of where we stand on international agreements, treaties, and so forth. They were rebuffed by the West. So putting all of these things together, it shouldn't come to any surprise to a lot of people to see what happened in the last 24 hours. But back to those objectives here, and here's the real one that has really got the backup of the West, the denazification of Ukraine. And everyone's saying, what Nazis? What Nazis? There's no Nazis in Ukraine. The president himself is Jewish. How could he possibly be Nazi? They're not talking about President Zelensky. They're talking about all the paramilitary neo-Nazi groups that have been backed and armed and trained by our Western military and intelligence agencies. Okay, this is well documented.
Yes.
These are the Azov Battalion and a number of these right sector affiliated. So they're ultra-nationalists. They follow Stefan Bandera, who fought with Hitler during the Second World War. So
they openly wear the badges.
They do have the insignias, the Nazi symbols, and things like this. So that the Kiev does not have control over these various paramilitary units who are on the front line in the Donbass shelling civilians. So for the last few years, Zelensky and the Poroshenko and Ukraine say, we're not shelling civilians. The Ukrainian military is not shelling civilians, but these independent nationalist paramilitaries are. And
where are they getting their weapons from?
From the United States,
the United Kingdom,
and from the United Kingdom.
Yes.
So we are effectively arming and training Nazis in Ukraine, and we've been doing it for a number of years. And all our politicians are saying, we don't know anything about this. So all you have to do is a few Google searches, and you can see all the documentation of this. You can see the photos. It's a bit disingenuous for our politicians to stand talking to the country and to the world, acting like they don't know anything about this. It's just kind of beyond ridiculous. To bring human rights violators and criminals and neo-Nazis to justice. So Russia is vowing to hold a tribunal to bring these people to justice. And we'll show you, they're probably not going to be apprehending them themselves. We don't think so. We think that that might actually be a point of negotiations for a possible ceasefire settlement. That remains to be seen. So looking at a strategic point of view, look at this. That's almost guaranteed right there. That's been accomplished. So check. Demilitarization of Ukraine. Their military, as we'll show you, has been pretty much, capabilities have been hobbled They don't have control of their own airspace. Russia now has pretty much operational control of Ukrainian airspace. So the bottom two, those have yet to be realized. But in terms of these objectives, Russia has already achieved 2 out of those main 4 objectives. So just so people know, this is a map of the Ukraine. There's Lugansk and Donetsk there in the eastern part. And so this is known as the Donbass region. And what's important, look at those 2 gold sections, Mike. That's where the old line of demarcation was there on that sort of western line of those gold, where the gold parts inside of Donetsk and Lugansk. So the Ukrainian military had pushed into those territories from 2014. There was a blitzkrieg. We'll show you a timeline in a minute. So right now, Russia is basically working with the People's Republic of Donetsk and Lugansk militaries to push back to the actual provincial line you can see there in white. So that's a main objective. So to secure those 2 as independent, autonomous regions, and so that basically pushing Azov battalions and Ukrainian military out. So in terms of Ukraine and Russia, look what's developing here. Now, if they push further, they've already secured the Crimean North Canal. They've restored water to Crimea. Ukraine cut that off in 2014. Now Crimea has water as of this morning. So, and then if they move out from the Donbass and the Dnepr River and these 2 key cities here, the Dnepr River basically cuts the country in half. So potentially you can see this, how this is going to develop. You see the red areas forming? Russia could cut off Kiev from the Black Sea and isolate it and make it landlocked. And just a little bit of an update here, Russia has just captured the Black Sea Island outpost.
No, that headline's very interesting there, Patrick. I know you're going to talk about this in a second, but the British media coverage of this was that these 13 soldiers on that island shouted at the Russian military, go F yourselves, and then died as a result, but that's not quite what this article says.
No, it doesn't. Look at the subhead, Mike. It's very interesting. Ukrainian soldiers pronounced by their president as killed while defending an island were actually taken prisoner, according to Russian reports. So who knows what the truth is with this? You have an image of an older woman with a bandage and a bloody eye on every single British newspaper.
Right.
The same person. It's like straight out of central casting. No, it may be a genuine person. She may be injured. It may be a tragedy, but they're using the exact same single image to sell a war narrative across maybe 5 or 6 different major daily newspapers in Britain. So it's like, where is the plurality of reporting?
Yes.
And it's not there. So by the way, Petro Poroshenko is an ex-convict now as well.
Yes.
He's being pursued for various things. He's been convicted. That's one of our presidents that we installed in there as well. It's not interesting. In here, we're calling it a basket case democracy here. Let's just take a look at a little bit of history background here. That's Yatsenyuk and Poroshenko. They were installed by the United States as prime minister and president respectively, the interim government, after a bloody overthrow, violent overthrow of a democratically elected president, which the West did not like because he was of the wrong orientation.
Sorry, just correct me again. So there was a democratically elected government in place. The West didn't like that. So we supported the overthrow of that democratically elected government and put these 2 clowns in instead.
Yeah, we did that for democracy.
Yes.
We did that for democracy. And then this was followed by the comedian who played president on television 2 years ago and decided to run for president as a joke. And lo and behold, Mike, he won by a landslide. That shows you the state of society and politics in this burgeoning democracy known as the Ukraine. Fantastic. But how bad was it? This is just scratching the surface. Let's take a look at a little bit of a timeline here. 2004, US, UK, EU, NATO backed a violent coup d'etat in Kiev. That's beyond debate. That's historical fact. However, you won't hear it on the BBC. They never mention it on the floor of the House of Commons. Everybody ignores this fact like it didn't exist.
Yeah, but that was 2014.
Ah, yes, it was 2014, yes. So that's when the coup happened in the Maidan coup. So here we go, 2014, 2015, the Ukrainian military under Poro and company, they ran an anti-terror blitzkrieg. They called it an anti-terror operation. They dubbed the whole of the Russian-speaking population in the East as terrorists. Okay, that happened. That really happened. So they ran a blitzkrieg, and that prompted the Minsk Accords. So Minsk I and II in 2014, 2015, that was the de facto peace process, internationally recognized. But what happened after that? Well, Ukraine government stated its policy is not to ratify nor implement the Minsk Accords. They're very open about that. This wasn't a secret, but this was never mentioned. This is why the US and UK officials would never open their mouth and say Minsk in public, because this was their stated policy. This was known in the legislature in Ukraine. Everybody knew this. So obviously they're sandbagging, intentionally sandbagging the UN effectively mandated peace process.
Right.
So this is how we got to this point. Kiev regime outlaws Russian language in certain areas and legal, I believe nationwide actually, legalized discrimination against ethnic Russians. What a burgeoning democracy this is. And by the way, if you look at the democracy index globally, Kiev is about 85th out of 160
or so.
60 or so. So they're not very high on the league table. Let's just put it that way. Here we go, 2014 to the present. Kiev regime outlaws certain Russian opposition parties. What else? They're arresting television station journalists, editors, taking TV off the air. This is normal bill of fare for Kiev, for this lovely democracy in Ukraine. So they're not doing very well in this kind of democracy game, Mike. This is what we're beginning to realize when we look back at the timeline. And so again, 2015 to the present, Ukrainian forces shelling civilians in the Donbass, who they've deemed as being not full people in their own country, not allowed to speak their own language. This is a population of 4 million, Mike.
Yeah.
So this 4 million people have been disappeared and canceled by the Western mainstream media, by our well-informed politicians. It's as if these 4 million people have no rights, don't exist. They might as well have fallen off the edge of the earth. So do you see where Russia might have a few problems with the situation? So they felt that because Minsk collapsed, they had no choice. If Minsk wasn't going to guarantee the security of the people of the Donbass, they're saying that's genocide. So we need to step in and provide military protection for the people of this region, restore their water, their electricity, their food, allow deliveries to come in, and basically do what Minsk was meant to do. For 7 years, they could have implemented Minsk. They intentionally did not. And the US and the UK and the EU were complicit in that, because as soon as Minsk was implemented, the quid pro quo was sanctions are lifted by the EU.
And we can't have sanctions lifted against Russia.
That's right. So now Minsk is dead. A new raft of sanctions have been lopped on top.
Earlier today, President Putin delivered another televised address and offered the absurd pretext that he sought the demilitarization and denazification of Ukraine. In fact, he is hurling the might of his military machine against a free and peaceful neighbor in breach of his own explicit pledge and every principle of civilized behavior between states.
The West, Britain and the United States, has an expansionist policy.
So arming, training jihadist, terrorist fighters in Syria by the thousands, funding them, creating parallel civil society structures, allowing them to take territory in Syria.
Expanding the EU eastwards into Poland, expanding NATO eastwards into Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia.
Not to mention Iraq.
So
Iraq.
If we're talking, what consistently is happening with the likes of Boris Johnson and other Western leaders is we constantly accuse other people of doing what we're doing ourselves, and then we tell well, anyway,
it's called gaslighting.
It certainly is.
So they're not. Ukraine is not an innocent country. Their military has been using our weapons to shell civilians for 7 years. Okay. And cutting off their food, their water, and they're like, that's not innocent. And diplomacy. We've been pursuing diplomacy to the final hour. The UK never once even prodded Kiev to try to implement the Minsk Accords. They were just button-lipped on it, and the press were right there complicit with our politicians on that.
Okay.
Any state that's making ethnic groups that constitute a large portion of their population and ostracizing them, making their language illegal, then shelling their civilians, That's a failed state, okay? That series of events means that you failed as a country, and it's only a matter of time before you start coming apart at the seams, or your neighbors are going to tear you apart at the seams to protect the ethnic oblasts in that country. That's exactly what we have seen happen over the last week. It doesn't take a genius or a rocket science or even someone with a PhD in international relations to work that out.
And to our Ukrainian friends, in this moment of agony, I say that we are with you and we are on your side. Your right to choose your own destiny is a right that the United Kingdom and our allies will always defend.
So Ukraine has the right to choose its own destiny, but Lugansk and Donetsk don't.
That's a good point, Mike. I guess the people in the Donbass don't have a right to choose their own destiny. What about the people in Crimea? They had a referendum. When was that? 2014? What was the result of that?
I think that was 98% in favor of separation from Ukraine and moving towards Russia.
Yeah, 96%. Yeah, it's a big difference there.
Yeah.
That's basically what Boris Johnson is saying there. Double standards once again. And by the way, the people in Donetsk and Lugansk are completely in abeyance with the UN Charter for self-determination.
Right.
So they defended their territory, for starters. They were being militarily shelled and targeted. They were being persecuted. They were being embargoed. And they drew borders and they organized a government. So they ticked all of the boxes, and they're recognized by one of their main neighbors. So they're already qualifying for nationhood, okay? So all this talk that Russia recognizing them 2 days ago, that was Russia's in violation of international law. And then the West are stupid. They put sanctions on Russia just for recognizing these two republics. That's not against international law to recognize somebody. That's a political decision. The biggest mistake, they put sanctions on them, and guess what? When you punish someone with sanctions, this is sanctions 101 theory, by the way, you don't punish them before they do something.
Right.
Otherwise, they're going to say, well, I might as well go ahead and do it. That's why the military operation was launched yesterday morning. So, you know, you geniuses in Washington and London and the rest, you can only pat yourself on the back for this one because you did a sterling job.
Right. Russia is going to be excluded from the international financial system and excluded from the City of London and so on. But in fact, Russia has prepared for this because last year, their dollar reserves were slashed to 16% of the central banks, the Russian central bank's pile of money, compared to 49% 4 years ago. And it's also reduced holdings of US treasuries by 98% from their peak in 2010. So Russia has seen the writing on the wall with respect to sanctions and has decided to deal with that to a certain degree.
Yeah.
So, you know, they're also positioning themselves.
This outrage will not stand, says Jan Stoltenberg.
Democracy will always prevail over autocracy. Freedom will always prevail over oppression.
Democracy will always prevail over autocracy as we come out of 2 years of what?
Well, not everybody's out of these 2 years. In France, there's millions of people on the street in France because the president and the government said you can't work, you can't buy food unless you take an experimental pharmaceutical product. Otherwise, we're going to discriminate against you. Same in Italy, also in Germany and other countries, Austria as well.
And of course, we should mention Canada. So is NATO going to act against Canada?
I think they should intervene in Canada and take out Trudeau. But he's a NATO member, so how's that going to work? He could invoke Article 5 if he gets attacked by another NATO member.
Yes.
Then what happens? It just becomes a big barroom brawl.
The one thing that we all agreed upon, the attack on the Ukraine by the Russians is an attack on democracy.
Putin is terrified by the prospect of a democracy at his border.
And that's why defending democracy, both at home and abroad, must be an urgent national security priority.
What is our democracy worth if we're not able and willing to stand against an invasion of another democracy?
This is a very evil move on the part of Vladimir Putin. He's a KGB guy who happens to be probably the richest man in the world because of his exploitation of his own people that he doesn't want them to know about. This, my friends, is our moment. This is the Sudetenland. That's what people were saying there.
So what's Joe going to do? Well, he's going to send a strong message to the Russians. How strong? Well, look at this. Joe Biden has ordered 7,000 more troops to Europe. He is not messing around. Where do you think he's sending those troops, Mike? He's going to be sending them to Germany. 7,000 more troops to Germany to rotate to fill in the other 7,000 that left over the summer, probably.
Yes.
So big, strong statement here by Biden. And this is going to reassure our NATO allies. So just know that Biden is not messing around here.
Good.
He absolutely means he's going to stand toe-to-toe with Vladimir Putin. So
I know this is hard and that Americans are already hurting. I will do everything in my power to limit the pain the American people are feeling at the gas pump. This is critical to me. But this aggression cannot go unanswered. If it did, the consequences for America would be much worse. America stands up to bullies. We stand up for freedom. This is who we are.
The president has already said Americans will be facing some economic fallout or some hardships. Can you explain to Americans what exactly will they face if this happens?
Sure. As the president talked about in his speech, we are aware that, again, when America stands for her principles and all of the things that we hold dear, it requires sometimes for us to put ourselves out there in a way that maybe we will incur some cost. And in this situation, that may relate to energy costs, for example.
That's a pretty good mask.
Oh, so why is the vice president hiding behind a mask? Is the pandemic still on? I don't know. So basically they're saying you be prepared to pay. So everything they've done to deflate or to inflate the currency, to cause hyperinflation, all the COVID relief, all the dumping of billions of dollars and wasting it on test and trace, buying vaccines that all got dumped in a landfill or sent away to some African country that we don't care about, okay? All of this stuff, furlough, and the list goes on, all the corporate welfare, all of that. And then jacking up the price of energy to pay for all these green policies. All of that has now been funneled into one very convenient scapegoat, and that is
Vladimir Putin.
Vladimir Putin. So job done, guys. Everything, all sins are absolved, and now everything's on Putin. That's how it works.
Yeah.
Also keep trying to make this argument that everything, with the energy situation, that they're doing everything that they can to mitigate the cost for Americans and the pain of the pump. It's just not true. If they wanted to mitigate the cost, they would turn the Keystone Pipeline back on, they would hire back all the guys they fired on day one, and they would get 800,000 barrels of oil a day running through that pipeline instead of importing 500,000 barrels a day from Russia. The other thing I want to bring up here is the Ukraine-NATO situation. So for years, Ukraine has asked to be in NATO. They've said we want to pay our fair share, we want to be part of the alliance, we want to have this Article 5 situation against Russia just in case they decide to invade like they are right now. Instead of, Ukraine was always told, well, you guys have to fix your corruption issues first. Joe Biden told them you have to fix your corruption issues first. And instead of actually helping them fix the corruption issue, the Bidens and other politicians in Europe and the United States participated in it. They got rich off of it. And now Ukraine, civilians there, are going to die as a result of this chaotic situation where they were taking advantage of the lawlessness, the corruption in Ukraine, not fixing it. They let Ukraine hang out there so they could all get rich. And now they're screwed. They're surrounded.
Really,
and so I think people need to remember that. They've been asking to be part of the alliance.
Yeah.
They've been told, nope. While people like President Biden have gotten rich off of it, Hunter Biden got rich off of it. And
that's fact. That happened. Why isn't anybody talking about that? Joe Biden basically held a gun, proverbially, to the Ukrainian government saying, if you don't fire the prosecutor that's investigating my son, we're going to withdraw over $1 billion in financial aid to your government. And Joe admitted and boasted that he got the prosecutor fired. Hunter Biden was creaming in $1 million a year for sit on the board of a gas company while his father was vice president in charge of the Ukraine portfolio. I mean, come on. Come on, man.
Corruption,
as Biden would say. Here's what the pipelines look like. So they say they've canceled Nord Stream 2. They're doing a victory lap right now in Washington and London saying we killed Nord Stream 2. That's the joint venture there. You can see from Russia there by Finland and directly into the port in, I think it was Rostock or something like that in Germany. So that's Nord Stream. But they don't say Nord Stream 1 is operational. Then you've got the Yamal pipeline that goes right through Poland. Poland takes off of that, by the way. That might not be counted in their gas, I'm not sure. Directly into Europe, and then over to other parts of the EU. So, and then you also have South Stream pipelines projects from the Black Sea to Turkey, through Bulgaria, and so forth. So there's a number of different routes there. So, and through the Ukraine. So the reason they're pursuing Nord Stream, there's two reasons. One is the Ukrainian situation is unstable for Russia. So they obviously want to bypass that situation. And also Germany needs more energy. Why? Because of Germany's green policies. Because natural gas is an important component of the green policies of Germany. They've shut down their coal plants. They've shut down their nuclear plants. They rely on natural gas to provide the base load for their power, to heat their homes, etc. So you can't just switch it off. If they do, the Greens and the woke brigade are going to have to accept the fact that coal's coming back.
Yes.
Coal's coming back, and so is nuclear. And I know Boris has gone a bit woke recently as well. So his dreams of a green utopia, that can't stand unless you have a stable and affordable supply of energy into Europe and the UK.
Yeah.
And wind farms ain't going to cut it. And not solar farms aren't going to cut it either. So it's all great rhetoric at COP26, but the reality is our politicians are making us pay well over the odds for energy when we shouldn't be. And why? For geopolitical and political reasons.
Yes.